This is an analysis of An Apple Gathering by Christina Rossetti. So to start us with some contextual information to help you put this into context, this was written in 1857 and later published in Goblin Market and Other Poems in 1862. So you can already see that there's a thread running through these poems that makes this similar in its content, I suppose, and its message with the Goblin Market. It's an allegorical fable, as much of Christina Rossetti's poetry is, so a message disguised as a simple story. It could reflect a Victorian society that constrains freedom, so the way that women are treated in society and the way that our choices or their choices meant that their destinies were already decided for them based on what choices they made. Could represent the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. But most likely it represents the fallen woman, and we've come across this quite a lot in Christina Rossetti's poetry. The title suggests a pastoral image of a community, and we find that this pastoral image is subverted because the thing that happens to the narrator is that she falls out of favour with the community from which she comes. So the first stanza. We can see from the use of I that this is a dramatic monologue and it's a personal account. There's lots of debate as to whether these poems are biographical or autobiographical regarding Christina Rossetti, but you could argue that a lot of them concern her work with the fallen women in the penitentiary and also her relationships with men that fell apart either because she wasn't ready to commit or she had disagreements about religious beliefs with them. Either way, this is an imagined personal account. So the fact that this narrator plucks the pink blossoms from the apple tree in the initial stanza, the plucked verb there suggests sexual connotations, the idea of plucking a cherry, that kind of idea. It's the impatience that is connoted by the verb plucked to capture the beauty of life. And the pink blossoms are taken before they are able to grow into apples. So on an apple tree, you'll see in the spring that loads of lovely pink blossoms are produced. And then towards the end of the spring, early summer, they all fall down and then they're replaced with apples. So what happens in this poem is that the narrator plucks the blossoms before they have chance to turn into an apple. So the idea is that she takes something too early or gives something away too early. And in this case, it's probably her virginity. And the pink blossoms have connotations of femininity and innocence, which fits with the idea of this being her virginity that she gives away before she is ready. However, she is saying that she uses these blossoms to put in her hair, which suggests that perhaps she is quite carefree, quite careless, doesn't regret her decision, she's quite happy about it. And then it says she goes back to the tree. So she's picked all the blossoms and then she goes back to the tree and she finds that there aren't any apples there. And she describes the season as dew season. And the dew season signifies perhaps sexual prime or an appropriate time, so the right time that she should have waited until to lose her virginity or to have relationships with men. It could be bad luck. And it definitely acts as a warning to other female readers that if you pick the blossoms too early, then you will not get the apples later. So you have to wait, you have to be patient. And then obviously the apples not being there suggests that she gave away her virginity prematurely. This premature indulgence has repercussions, it has a consequence. Just a note on the rhyme scheme, it's a regular alternate rhyme scheme, so an A-B rhyme scheme. This regularity suggests a regularity of suffering later down in the poem. It could also just mask the danger of the message that's being given. So remember, in her fables, she quite often delivers a very serious message to women, but in a sing-songy way. It could also reflect the way that the character currently feels. She's quite happy, she's quite jolly. Okay, so obviously now she's realised there aren't any apples, she kind of knocks about with an empty basket and sees lots of people with full baskets. So this is kind of a transitory stanza. So the fact that she walks along with this dangling basket really contrasts with the previous image in stanza 1 about the fact that she wears the blossoms in her hair. The fact that she was wearing the blossoms in her hair suggested beauty, suggested frivolity, and now she's kind of trudging along, hauling this empty basket with her, which suggests a melancholy that she didn't have before. So it shows the consequence of her actions. And people can see her with this basket and they mock her. Her neighbours mocked her while they saw me pass. So it's almost like she has to publicly show what's happened to her, and everybody knows that she's lost her virginity. Everybody knows that she's done something she shouldn't have out of wedlock, and they mock her for it. She is now the fallen woman, and she is outcast because of it. She's not given any chance to redeem herself. She's not given any sympathy. She is completely outcast because of it. And she's empty-handed. So we realise here that the apples are really valuable because they represent maturity, or they represent marriage, or they represent patience. But either way, the message is that she should have waited for the apples to blossom. So the next stanza focuses in on some of the people that she meets, some additional characters from the poem that she meets along her journey. And the first two women are Lillian and Lilius. So obviously these names are derived from lilies, which suggests a purity to the girls, perhaps holding them up as the standard, that they waited and they were pure, and that's why they are now being rewarded. The way that their names are almost identical perhaps suggests homogeneity, which is about the societal expectations of women and how if you are homogenous and you're the same as everybody else, you will be rewarded. So it's about keeping to the rules, obeying the codes of conduct, and staying in line. And because the narrator doesn't do that, she's punished. They have heaped up baskets. So remember that the narrator has an empty basket. Lillian and Lilius have heaped up baskets. So they've been rewarded for their purity. Perhaps their reward is marriage, perhaps their reward is fertility. But either way, they have been successful. They have met the expectations of Victorian femininity. And the idea that their mother's home was near could suggest safety for the two girls, because perhaps they spent lots of time with their mother, and their mother was a good Christian woman and she taught them values and they looked up to her and they followed exactly her example. It could also suggest a cyclical role of women. So the idea that the girls will turn into mothers, so that role is near to them, they're going towards that, that's the journey they're on. And there's a certain safety in that role. Another character that is met on this journey is Plump Gertrude. So Plump Gertrude kind of makes me think of a stereotypical country bumpkin kind of girl, ruddy cheeked, likes to eat lots of cheese. But then you've also got the connotation of her being quite naive, perhaps sexually inactive. But the fact that she's plump could suggest a certain sexuality, the idea of her having feminine curves that would have made her sexual or sexualized. And it could also be a comparison in terms of body image. So in the Victorian period, there was a lot of fetishization around women's bodies, and the idea of them having to have this tiny waist, large hips to symbolize good fertility. And perhaps this idea of Plump Gertrude, who was perhaps always a bit overweight when she was younger, maybe not as desirable as other girls, she's actually won. She's got one over on the narrator because she's actually got her basket full of fruit and the narrator hasn't. So it's got nothing to do with looks, it's got nothing to do with personality, it's all to do with towing the line and making sure that you retain your innocence for as long as you can. Plump Gertrude has also won a stronger hand, and a voice talked with her through the shadows cool. So these adjectives here, this use of the stronger hand, symbolizes a husband, or a partner at least. It's a positive image of a husband, and he guides her through the world. He is her protector. And you can see the jealousy that the narrator exhibits here, that she looks at Gertrude with her husband and she feels that she wants that, she desires that, and now she has no chance of getting it. So there's a lot of regret in this stanza. Okay, so the tone changes again, where we are told or given an indication as to who the intended listener for the poem is. So the narrator now talks to her lover, or we assume it's her lover, the person who took her blossom. And the lack of response from Willy Willy suggests that he has moved on, he doesn't care, and actually the impact of sex is wholly on the woman, and the men can do whatever they like, can sleep with whomever they like, and there's no consequence for them. Whereas for a woman, the consequence is so dire. And she questions what happened between them, and she seems really hurt and dejected by this. And she wonders whether she should have waited for the apples, and whether he's now looking for other apples rather than her blossoms that he took. Should she have waited? She seems really upset and really confused. And the rhetorical question at the end could be read a number of ways. Is it anger that he left her? Is it regret that she'll never see him again, or that she gave him her virginity? Or is it sadness because she loved him and she trusted him? And I think the sadness is kind of emphasised at the bottom, where she says that love is worthier than apples. So being in love is way more important, and perhaps that's what happened to her. She fell in love with someone, thought it was the right thing to do to have sex with him, and actually it turned out to be a terrible decision. But that suggests that she's quite naive. And then we kind of flash back to what it was like when she was with Willy Willy. It might just be Willy. Maybe his name's just repeated twice for emphasis, but I quite like calling him Willy Willy. So change in tone. This is quite introspective, and we get the sense that this is very unresolved because there's no response to the questions that she asks. It deviates from the fable, so it deviates from it being just a message about a girl, because we don't really know what the message is, and it's left up to the reader to decide what the moral message of the poem is. So obviously that's a reflection on the memories that she had with her lover. And this use of the word stooped is really interesting, because it could suggest that he was obviously physically bigger than her. So perhaps he was an experienced man and she was a younger girl, which might be quite informative as to why she ended up having sex with him, because he maybe tricked her into doing it or groomed her into doing it. Or he could have been from a higher social standing than her, so she might have felt like she was going to be wealthy, she was going to be a lady of the manor because this fancy man paid attention to her. Or it could just be that she thinks that he had to lower himself to be with her, so perhaps there's a bit of bitterness there. And yet there's this ambiguous message at the end. So she talks about how they used to laugh and listen and everything was really fun, and yet now she says we shall not walk again. And the exclamation suggests anger rather than regret, but the overriding message is that there is no consequence for Willy Willy. The consequence is only for her. She doesn't know what he's doing. He's probably off eating apples somewhere else with somebody else, and yet she's by herself, walking alone, totally dejected by society. So we've got a repetition of the personal pronoun I. At the beginning, this seemed empowering because she was in charge of her sexuality. She plucked the blossoms, she decided what to do. And yet the repetition of it in the final stanza shows that she's isolated. So perhaps that's a direct consequence of her actions. So the fact that she was empowered at the beginning has directly led to her being isolated at the end. So in terms of a structural technique, that's quite useful to talk about. Again, she talks about her neighbours passing her. There's quite a negative lexical field here. The passing over, the chill, the dews, the loitering, it's all quite subdued, quite melancholy. And it clearly shows that she's socially excluded, and it endures. So it's not just temporary. This is going on now for months and months. The weather's changing, the seasons are changing, it changes from night to day, and still she is isolated and dejected by society. And the fact that the night grows chill and she doesn't really feel it anymore suggests that she might be numb in terms of her emotions, or the fact that she's determined to make a difference, determined perhaps to change her life around, or an uncertainty, she's just not sure what to do. And the fact that she loiters suggests that she doesn't know how to make things better. What is her fate going to be? How is she going to survive this? And the fact that the dew fell fast could be metaphorical for the narrator herself, or it could be metaphorical for the society as a whole, that perhaps that these institutions that trap women don't work anymore and they need to be changed. Or if, on the other hand, women keep doing what they want, then society will fall, depending on how you read Rossetti.